The night was darker than any soul had ever seen, and the wind carried whispers that seemed almost alive, warning of a power long forgotten. In the heart of a crumbling city, where the ruins of an ancient civilization met the modern world, a shadow moved with purpose, sharp eyes scanning the broken streets for signs of life. No one knew the history of the place, not the people who had fled generations ago, leaving behind temples and statues coated in dust and secrets. Among the ruins, a single figure emerged from the mist, her presence both commanding and terrifying. Her hair, flowing and dark, shimmered with an unnatural light, almost as if it had a mind of its own, twisting and coiling like a living thing. She paused at the edge of a shattered fountain, its waters long dried, staring into the reflection that wasn't quite her own, and in that mirror image she saw not a woman but a legend reborn. Memories of betrayal, sorrow, and rage flooded her mind, images of a life stolen, a crown taken, a kingdom destroyed. Each memory burned with a fierce intensity, a fire that had lain dormant for centuries, waiting for the night when the world would be ready to pay for its sins. From the shadows behind the broken columns, whispers carried on the wind, fragments of old chants, warnings that had been repeated and ignored, calling her name with both reverence and fear. Her eyes glowed, not with anger alone, but with a determination that could topple empires and rewrite history. Every step she took left cracks in the stone beneath her, as if the earth itself recognized the return of the cursed queen. High above, a storm gathered, lightning slicing the sky, illuminating the skeletal towers of the city, and revealing symbols etched into walls that no historian had ever been able to decipher. Each symbol pulsed faintly, resonating with her presence, awakening powers that had long been sealed. She remembered the day it all began, the betrayal of those she had trusted, the conspiracy that had brought her to ruin, and the curse that had turned her beauty into a weapon feared by all. Now, standing in the remnants of a world that had forgotten her, she felt the power stirring within her, a dangerous, seductive force that could either consume her or make her unstoppable. In the distance, a figure approached, cloaked and wary, moving carefully to avoid the unseen traps and guardians left behind in the old city. He had been sent to find her, to understand her motives, and perhaps to stop the awakening that threatened the balance of the world. Yet as he drew closer, he felt a chill that ran through his very bones, a sensation that the air itself had changed, heavier, alive, watching him. She turned her gaze toward him, and the storm seemed to respond, thunder rolling like the growl of a beast awakened from slumber. The figure froze, captivated by her presence and terrified at the same time, unsure if he should flee or speak. But before he could decide, a serpent-like shadow flickered across the ground, wrapping around broken pillars, moving with an intelligence that sent shivers down his spine. It was a warning, a demonstration of the power that had been sealed for centuries, now free yet under her control. She raised a hand, and the shadow recoiled, submitting to her command as if acknowledging her as the rightful queen of a realm that had never truly belonged to the living. Every instinct in him screamed danger, but curiosity, stubbornness, and a sense of duty pushed him forward, and he took a cautious step, then another, until he finally stood before her. Her eyes, sharp and commanding, studied him as if reading every thought, every secret he had tried to hide even from himself. Then, with a voice that carried the weight of centuries, low and mesmerizing, she spoke. It was not a greeting nor a threat, but a statement that resonated deep within the ruins, shaking the foundations of the city. "You have come," she said, and the words were more than sound. They were an acknowledgment that the prophecy had begun, that the rise of the cursed queen was no longer a tale whispered in shadows, but a reality that would challenge the very laws of power, destiny, and fear. The figure's hands trembled, yet he steadied himself, knowing that the decisions made in the next moments could determine the fate of countless lives. Behind her, shadows stirred, flickering like ancient spirits, ready to act, ready to protect their queen, ready to awaken the fury that had been locked away for generations. Outside the ruins, the storm intensified, the sky splitting with blinding light, and for a fleeting moment the world seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see whether the legend would rise as a savior, a destroyer, or something entirely beyond comprehension. And as the first strike of lightning illuminated her face, every feature etched with pain, strength, and an unyielding will, The figure realized that history itself had returned, not as a memory but as a living, breathing force that would not be denied. The air was thick with anticipation, and in that silence, a single thought echoed through both minds. This encounter was not the beginning, but the awakening, and nothing would ever be the same again. The figure blinked under the storm's fury, trying to steady his racing heart, but every instinct told him he had walked into a force far beyond anything the world had ever seen. The ruins themselves seemed alive, shifting subtly as if the walls, the broken pillars, and the scattered statues were leaning in to witness the confrontation. He swallowed hard, feeling the weight of centuries pressing down on him, the air thick with an energy that tugged at his very soul. She studied him silently, her piercing gaze unraveling every thought he had tried to hide, and he shivered under the realization that this was not a woman seeking vengeance alone. This was a queen whose wrath had been tempered by time, whose sorrow had been sharpened into a weapon that could strike with deadly precision. Without warning, a gust of wind threw dust and fragments into the air, and a chorus of whispering voices rose around them, echoing in the empty city, each word twisted by centuries of anger and loss. The figure's mind raced, recalling legends of Medusa, stories of beauty turned monstrous, of curses that could petrify the unwary, yet nothing he had been told compared to the living presence before him. She raised a hand, and the serpent-like shadows that had flickered moments before began to coil around her feet, writhing and twisting, ready to strike at a command that was silent yet absolute. The figure took another step forward, compelled by a mix of duty and disbelief, and in that instant a faint glimmer of understanding flashed across his mind. This was not simply a creature of legend, but a force of balance, a queen who had been betrayed by those she trusted most, and who now carried the weight of retribution for the sins of the world. Lightning split the sky again, and for a brief second, the ruins were bathed in an otherworldly glow, revealing intricate carvings on the walls that no human eyes had seen for centuries, symbols that pulsed in sync with her heartbeat, as if the city itself were alive, acknowledging her return. The figure raised his hand in a gesture of peace, but the shadows recoiled slightly, responding to her tension, signaling that the moment of judgment had not yet passed. She stepped forward, her movements fluid yet deliberate, each step echoing through the empty streets, and the air thickened, vibrating with power. "You come seeking answers," she said, her voice a mixture of melody and steel, each word carefully measured, carrying a weight that made the ground beneath them tremble. "But answers alone will not save you. Only action can determine the path ahead." The figure nodded slowly, understanding that this was more than a conversation. It was a test, a challenge that would demand courage, wisdom, and an unyielding resolve. Behind her, the shadows shifted into forms that resembled warriors, guardians of an age long past, each figure moving with silent precision, watching, ready to strike if she willed it. He felt a shiver down his spine, not from fear alone, but from the overwhelming realization that history was alive in this place, breathing through her and the city, waiting to reclaim its voice. He asked cautiously, "Why now? Why return after all these years?" She paused, her gaze turning toward the storm eyes, reflecting the flashes of lightning like shards of fire, and for a moment the wind carried her voice far beyond the ruins, reaching ears that had never heard the tale before. "Because the world has forgotten," she replied, voice low but commanding, "and those who were once innocent now pay for the ignorance of their ancestors. I have waited, watched, and prepared. The time for reckoning has come." The figure took a deep breath, feeling the enormity of her words, and instinctively, he knew that whatever path lay ahead would not be ordinary. The shadows behind her began to stretch, elongate, and merge into forms that resembled serpentine guardians, each radiating an energy that could both protect and destroy. He realized that this was not a confrontation he could survive with weapons alone. Understanding, strategy, and trust, if it could be earned, were the only tools that might allow him to navigate the peril before him. As she moved closer, the faint hum of the ancient city intensified, resonating through the bones of the ruins, vibrating in tune with her power, and the storm seemed to respond, lightning striking, repeatedly illuminating the darkened sky with brilliant flashes that cast long dancing shadows across the cracked stones. The figure stepped cautiously, and the shadows rippled with every movement as if testing his resolve. "There are forces coming," she said, a flicker of vulnerability hidden beneath her commanding tone. "Forces that will not hesitate. Forces that have already begun to stir in the world beyond these walls. You must decide whether you will stand with me or be swept away like the rest." He felt the truth in her words, the weight of destiny pressing down, and the knowledge that the world would soon witness the rise of a power long thought lost. In that moment, he understood that nothing he had known could prepare him for what lay ahead, and yet he also sensed that the choice was not entirely his own. It was a path entwined with fate, with the legacy of those who had come before, and with a queen who was as merciless as she was just. As the storm reached its peak, winds howling through broken streets, he realized that the encounter had only begun, and the true journey, the battle of wit, courage, and power was about to unfold. Every shadow, every whisper, every flicker of lightning seemed to warn him of the trials ahead, and the city itself waited with bated breath, holding its secrets until the moment they would be revealed. She turned, and for the first time a faint smile touched her lips, a signal that the path ahead was not only perilous but necessary, a step toward restoring balance in a world that had long been blind to its own sins. And in that charged silence, the figure knew that there was no turning back, for he had stepped into the awakening of the cursed queen, and the world would tremble in her rise. The storm finally began to relent, but the air remained thick with tension, electric and alive, as if the city itself were holding its breath, waiting to see what would unfold next. The figure realized that every step forward would be watched, measured, and judged not just by the cursed queen before him, but by the ancient guardians that had awakened in the shadow's eyes, glinting with a strange, almost human intelligence. She moved through the ruins with a grace that defied explanation, each motion commanding respect and every glance hinting at a story of betrayal, rage, and a longing for justice that spanned centuries. Behind her, serpentine shadows twined around the broken columns, their scales glinting faintly under the lingering flashes of lightning, ready to strike at a moment's notice. The figure followed cautiously, trying to read the silent signals she gave, understanding slowly that trust would have to be earned through action, not words. As they entered a larger chamber, the remnants of what once had been a grand hall, he noticed carvings on the walls, depicting battles and rulers long forgotten. Each figure frozen in stone, yet almost alive, their eyes seeming to track his every move. She paused at the center of the hall, a faint pulse of light emanating from beneath her feet, and the shadows recoiled slightly, forming a protective circle around her as if anticipating some imminent threat. "This place holds secrets," she said, voice low, carrying the weight of centuries. "Secrets that could destroy kingdoms or save them, depending on who wields the knowledge." The figure nodded, feeling the gravity of her words, and took a tentative step closer, the echoes of his movement mingling with the faint whispers that seemed to rise from the very stones. Suddenly, a low rumble shook the floor beneath them, dust falling from the ceiling, and from the darkness at the far end of the hall, figures began to emerge. They were not human, yet not entirely monstrous, their forms twisted by time, magic, and the curse that had lingered over this city. The cursed queen stepped forward, her hand raised, and the serpentine shadows surged ahead, forming a living barrier between her and the approaching threat. The figure realized he was witnessing the first test of her power, a glimpse into the immense forces she had mastered since her exile, and a warning of the dangers that would follow. One of the creatures stepped forward, its eyes glowing like embers, its voice a guttural whisper that echoed unnaturally through the chamber. "You should not have returned," it hissed, but her response was calm, almost regal. "I do not seek permission," she replied. "I claim what is mine, and I will decide the fate of all who stand in my path." With that, the shadows struck, moving with terrifying precision, coiling around the intruders, striking with speed that blurred the air. The figure watched in awe as the cursed queen controlled every motion with a flick of her wrist, a subtle gesture and a command that resonated in the very air around them. The creatures faltered, caught in the hypnotic force of her presence, and one by one they fell to the ground, immobilized, unable to resist her will. Yet even as the last figure collapsed, the tension did not dissipate. The figure knew this was only the beginning, a warning of the greater dangers that awaited beyond the city's walls. She turned to him, her eyes burning with a mix of intensity and something else, something almost human. A flicker of vulnerability. "You will need allies," she said, "and you will need courage. For the world outside does not yet understand the forces it has awakened." The figure nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility pressing on him. Every story he had heard, every legend, every warning about the cursed queen, now seemed almost trivial in comparison to the living reality before him. As they moved deeper into the hall, the carvings on the walls seemed to shift, revealing hidden passages and chambers that had remained sealed for centuries. Each one whispering secrets, each one holding potential dangers or powerful artifacts lost to time. The storm outside had cleared almost completely, leaving a mist that clung to the city like a ghost, softening the jagged lines of the ruins, yet making the shadows even darker, more ominous. The figure realized that in the moments to come, every decision, every action would be critical. They would face creatures, forces, and enemies that defied understanding. Yet within all of it, the cursed queen's power was absolute, her control over the shadows, the city, and even the approaching threats nearly flawless. He wondered what had kept her hidden all these centuries, what had allowed the world to forget her, and yet he understood that the forgotten queen was not one to remain hidden any longer. In the distance, a faint glimmer caught his eye, a doorway, carved into the stone, leading to a staircase spiraling downward, covered in dust and cobwebs as if untouched for a millennium. She glanced at it and then back at him, a silent invitation, a challenge, and a warning all at once. The figure felt a shiver of anticipation and fear, knowing that the journey into that darkness would reveal truths that had been buried, awaken forces that had been dormant, and test their courage to the limits. As they stepped toward the entrance, the shadows at her command swirled, forming protective tendrils that moved like living armor, and the first faint echoes of a distant roar reached their ears, a sound that promised that the world beyond these ruins had begun to stir, and the rise of the cursed queen was no longer a secret. Every instinct in the figure screamed danger, yet he could not turn back, for he had entered a story that had begun long before his birth, a tale of vengeance. Power and destiny intertwined, and he now understood that the choices made in the coming hours would shape not just their fate, but the fate of all who dared to stand in the path of history being rewritten. As they descended the spiral staircase, the air grew colder and heavier, carrying a scent of earth, stone, and something faintly metallic, as if the ruins themselves were warning them of what lay ahead. The figure felt his heart pound against his chest, every nerve alive with tension, and he realized that the darkness below was not empty, but charged with a presence older than time, waiting, patient, and lethal. The cursed queen moved ahead with effortless grace, her eyes glowing, faintly illuminating the walls just enough to reveal ancient murals depicting battles between gods and mortals, serpents coiled around warriors, eyes gleaming with malevolent intelligence frozen in eternal conflict. Her voice broke the silence, calm yet commanding. "These halls remember everything. Every betrayal, every victory, every life lost in the name of power. And now they will witness my return." The figure swallowed hard, following closely, feeling the weight of the centuries pressing down, the walls almost closing in, as though the city itself sought to test their resolve. Shadows shifted along the edges of the walls, moving with a life of their own, and serpentine whispers slithered through the air, faint, sinister, and impossible to ignore. Suddenly the ground trembled beneath them, small cracks forming in the stone, as though the very foundation of the city acknowledged her presence and stirred with recognition. From the darkness ahead, faint glowing eyes appeared. Then dozens, then hundreds, until the walls seemed alive with creatures both human and monstrous, their forms distorted by time, magic, and the curse that had bound them for centuries. They moved silently, converging on the staircase with an unnerving precision, drawn to the power of the cursed queen like moths to a flame. She stopped, raised a hand, and the shadows at her command surged forward, forming a living shield that pushed back the advancing creatures without a sound, the walls echoing with the energy that pulsed from her very being. The figure took a step forward, trembling, knowing that this was no ordinary fight, and that even the weapons he carried would be useless against forces born of ancient magic and wrath. Lightning from above, faint but relentless, illuminated the chamber. revealing vast carvings and runes glowing faintly, each symbol resonating with her power, reinforcing her dominance over the creatures that had gathered. One of the creatures broke from the formation, charging with unnatural speed, its claws cutting through the air with a deadly hiss, and the figure braced himself, expecting a strike. But the cursed queen moved with blinding swiftness, her hand flicking, and the creature froze mid-air. Petrified as if touched by stone, its eyes wide in shock before crumbling into fragments. The figure realized, with a mixture of awe and fear, that her control over this dark magic was absolute, her power both beautiful and terrifying, a weapon forged from pain, betrayal, and centuries of exile. As more creatures advanced, she did not flinch. Instead, she advanced herself, her hair flowing like dark fire, shadows coiling around her like living armor, moving in unison with her will, striking with precision and speed beyond mortal comprehension. The figure followed, stepping into the fray, knowing that even without magic, his courage and resolve could be tested, for this was a trial of mind, heart, and survival. She spoke again, her voice cutting through the chaos. "This is only the beginning. They are the remnants of those who wronged me, the echoes of history refusing to rest. Every step forward will demand your strength, your wit, and your trust." The creatures recoiled and surged in waves, yet each attack met resistance, each strike countered by her command over shadows and serpents, and the figure began to see patterns in her movements, a rhythm that guided the flow of battle, teaching him, showing him, preparing him for what lay ahead. As the clash continued, the staircase opened into a vast cavern beneath the city, lit by glowing crystals embedded in the walls, their light reflecting off the polished stone floor, casting eerie patterns that danced across the advancing enemies. She paused, her gaze sweeping the cavern, and whispered, almost to herself, "Here is where destinies will be tested, and alliances will be forged or broken. The world above cannot yet comprehend what has awakened below." The figure took in the scale of the place, the endless formations of creatures, the power radiating from her, and realized that the coming battle would not be just one of strength, but of strategy, courage, and unyielding will. Every step into the cavern was measured, every breath charged with anticipation, for they knew that outside forces had begun to stir, drawn to the reawakening of the cursed queen, and that what awaited them in the shadows would challenge everything they believed about the world, history, and power. She turned to him briefly, a flicker of something almost human passing across her face, a reminder that beneath the fearsome exterior was a queen who had suffered, who had loved, and who had been betrayed. "Prepare yourself," she said, voice steady, "for the next strike will not be merely physical. You will face truths that will shake your understanding, enemies that will test your spirit, and a path that will demand sacrifices beyond imagining." The figure nodded, heart racing, knowing that the journey into the cavern was more than a battle. It was a test of destiny, courage, and loyalty, and that the rise of the cursed queen was no longer a tale of legend, but a living, breathing force that would reshape the world above. Shadows moved, creatures shifted, and the cavern seemed to pulse in rhythm with her heartbeat, as if acknowledging the inevitability of what was coming. The first true confrontation had begun, and the figure realized that nothing would ever be the same again, for the cursed queen had returned not only to reclaim her power but to rewrite the rules of a world that had long forgotten her, and the echoes of that return would be felt across every land, in every heart, and in every shadow that dared to resist her will. The cavern trembled beneath their feet as the final wave of creatures surged forward, but the cursed queen stood unwavering, her shadowy serpents swirling around her like living armor, coiling and striking with perfect precision, each movement a testament to centuries of power honed in exile. And the figure realized that the culmination of their journey had arrived, a confrontation that would determine the fate of the world above and the balance of forces long hidden in darkness. Lightning from cracks in the cavern ceiling illuminated the scene, casting eerie, flickering shadows on the walls, reflecting the tension, fear, and awe of everyone present, and the creatures hesitated for a moment, sensing the immense force of her will and the inevitability of their defeat unless they adapted instantly. She raised her hands, and the serpentine shadows surged, striking multiple enemies at once, immobilizing, binding, and petrifying them with uncanny efficiency while the figure moved closer, His own courage tested as he realized that mere observation would not suffice. He would have to act, and his choices now carried the weight of destiny itself. The largest of the creatures broke through the shadows, roaring with a voice that reverberated like thunder through the cavern, its eyes glowing red, its claws tearing through stone, and for a moment even the queen seemed challenged her eyes, narrowing, calculating, assessing every weakness, every opportunity in the chaos. With a swift gesture, her hair, alive and sharp like blades, lashed out, slicing through the creature's defenses, and the shadows twisted, wrapping around its massive frame, restraining and subduing it until it crumbled, a testament to her mastery over forces that had once been feared by gods and mortals alike. The figure watched, awe and fear battling within him as the other creatures faltered, sensing that their leader's power was being undone, and yet he knew the victory was not yet complete. More lay ahead, forces unseen waiting to challenge them, and the consequences of failure would be catastrophic. She turned to him briefly, her eyes piercing, conveying both a warning and an unspoken trust, a silent understanding that the battles fought here were not only for survival but for redemption, justice, and the reclamation of a legacy stolen long ago. Together they advanced, the figure supporting her where needed, learning to anticipate her power, moving in synchrony with the shadows and serpents, understanding finally that courage alone was not enough. It required awareness, trust, and unity with the force he had chosen to follow. From the far end of the cavern, a sudden tremor indicated the arrival of a greater threat, something ancient and far more dangerous, drawn to the queen's resurgence, a force that had slumbered for centuries yet now stirred with a fury unmatched, ready to reclaim dominion over a world that had dared to forget it. She paused, glancing toward the dark entrance from which the threat emerged, a faint smirk on her lips, revealing her confidence, and the figure sensed, in that moment, the true scale of her power, the depth of her strategy, and the inevitability of her triumph, if they remained united. The creatures that had once seemed unstoppable now fell back, confused, and the shadows obeyed her every command, forming barriers, weapons, and shields, demonstrating a precision that only centuries of practice, patience, and cunning could achieve. A blinding light filled the cavern, suddenly emanating from the queen herself, as she summoned every ounce of power, calling upon the ancient energy of the city, the long-forgotten magic of the ruins, and the boundless rage and sorrow of a life stolen, transformed into a force that shook the cavern, lifted dust and stone into the air, and sent tremors through the remaining creatures. The figure shielded his eyes, briefly feeling the overwhelming energy, yet he understood that this was the moment of reckoning, the point where destiny, courage, and will converged, and where the rise of the cursed queen would be etched into the history of all realms. One by one, the creatures were defeated, immobilized, or destroyed their resistance, futile against a queen whose command was absolute, whose wrath was tempered by intelligence and strategy, and whose presence alone altered the balance of power in ways the world had never seen. As the last of the threats fell silent, the cavern quieted, the only sound the faint hum of the queen's power subsiding. The figure exhaled, feeling relief mixed with reverence, realizing that the legend had returned not merely as a myth, but as a force capable of shaping the world's future. She turned to him, the faint glow in her eyes softening, revealing the queen beneath the fearsome warrior, a being who had suffered, endured, and emerged stronger than any could imagine. "The world has forgotten," she said, voice calm yet carrying the weight of authority, "but I will ensure it remembers. Not as before, not with fear, but with respect, with understanding, and with the knowledge that power wielded with wisdom can shape destiny itself." The figure nodded, understanding that their journey had not merely been survival or conquest, but the reclaiming of a legacy, a rebalancing of forces, and a statement that history, however forgotten, could never remain silent when a queen returned to claim what was rightfully hers. Together they ascended from the cavern shadows, retreating at her command, the ruins settling back into silence, yet the air remained charged with the energy of her awakening, the storm outside now clearing to reveal the first faint light of dawn breaking over the horizon. The figure realized that the rise of the cursed queen was complete, not in vengeance alone, but in the restoration of power, the acknowledgement of history, and the promise of a future shaped by strength, intelligence, and unyielding will. As they stepped into the light, the world above remained unaware of the events that had transpired below, yet everything had changed. The legend was alive, the prophecy fulfilled, and the cursed queen, once betrayed and forgotten, now stood as a force that would echo through every heart, every shadow, and every story yet to be told. And in that silence, as the first birds began to sing and the ruins glistened with the aftermath of battle, the figure understood that the awakening was only the beginning, the rise complete, and the legacy eternal,